afternoon. Thank you all for coming. So I think we should just get started. Let me introduce David Williams, photographer. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And just to alert you to the fact that this is being videoed, I think, by Bart there. So I hope that's all right with you. You're unlikely to be seen. You're unlikely to be seen, I think, but just to let you know that that's the case. And I suppose it may end up on some Summerhall website at some point or something. Anyway, you can hear me okay. I think the acoustics in here are really good, yeah? In fact, what a space. What a space for revealing my innards as a photographer to you. And in a way, that's probably maybe what I'm going to be doing. But thanks to Summerhall, and we have David Coates here today. I'm very grateful to him and his team for inviting me to exhibit here, and for Sam for organising today. It's been a lovely experience, actually. And we're okay, Bart, yeah? Yeah. Good. So, now some of you will be singing along with the chorus of bits of this, actually. Robin, feel free. But I wish I'd discovered this quote many years ago when I started teaching, really, because I'd probably put it at the beginning of every lecture. People will tell you where they've gone, they'll tell you where to go. Until you get there yourself, you never really know. This is the important bit. Where some have found their paradise, others just come to harm. And that's from Joni Mitchell, from the album Hejira. And it's very important for me. And you know, Joni Mitchell has, if you've got a problem in life, she's got an answer for it. Maybe not in her own life, but for everybody else's. I find this such an inspiring thing. And it's like a health warning, you know. What I'm about to go through here, it might not resonate at all. Hopefully you might like some of the images. But I'm trying to point to a thread through, well, it's 40 years now, actually. And I've done all kinds of things in photography. I've worked commercially and in the kind of so-called fine art sector. And some of it seems very, very disparate looking back. Fair enough, that's life. But for me, there's a thread running through certain elements of it. And that thread can be quite difficult to explain. Non-duality is a terrible word, actually. I don't like it, but it's maybe as close as you'll get to and it's a word I discovered much later on when I started in photography than when I started. And it seemed to ring true for me in terms of what I was trying to express. This is from a rather curious book called I Hope You Die Soon. Simply a word that attempts to describe the reality that there is only oneness arising as everything and that there is no separation. All sounds very grand and mystical and things. In some ways it's not. We'll look at that in a second. But, you know, being metaphysical and all the rest of it, fair enough, but I mean, you know, I think Woody Allen's advice here is, or his comment is quite relevant. I'm astounded by people who want to know the universe when it's hard enough to find your way around Chinatown. And this is the problem. It does exist, it cannot be expressed, you know. So that's me off the hook. I'll give up on the quotes quite soon, don't worry. This is one of the first pictures I took, with no knowledge of non-duality or any of that stuff at all. But all I remember was in the darkroom, Robin's darkroom, no doubt, and seeing this coming through. It was quite a lucky picture in some ways. I won't go into the details of that. But when I saw it, I thought, this is what I want to say in my work. Picture of a pram, certainly. An old man in a pram. This is pre-digital. It'd be very easy to mock this up these days, wouldn't it? And we assume underneath that hood is a child. So they're both in the same container, on the same journey, as it were. One was the other, one will become the other, etc., etc. It becomes almost embarrassing talking in these terms. But as I say, I'm revealing my innards here, so be gentle with me. And it just so happens, wonderfully, there's a sculpture of the Madonna and Child there in the background. So that for me was pivotal. And of course, off I went. I was still a musician, I think, in these days. But it stayed with me. And then you get a quote like this: all creation from this perch is made from this incredible foundation. Every mountain, every star, the smallest salamander or woodland tick, each thought in our mind, each flight of a ball is but a web of elemental yes, no's woven together. So this opposites thing again, and how they relate and are interconnected to the point of interchangeability in this context. Now, you think that's maybe some kind of West Coast nutter who's come away with that, some kind of new age. It's not. It's an article on computation from Wired magazine, actually. Nothing and ones, zeros and ones, everything made up from that. Very beautiful quote. And, I'll get into the kind of meat of larger projects shortly, but it's not weird and mystical, particularly contemporary science supports all of this. I don't know if Callum's here, we were talking the other day about it. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, these two opposites. A very famous Zen saying from, was it 2000, not quite 2,000 years old, but that's, to my knowledge, limited knowledge, but I'm not the first one to say it, that's quantum physics. E equals mc squared. They just happened to be on top of this 2,000 years ago, interestingly enough. So there are, and I'm going to be meandering all over the place. Does exist, cannot be expressed. So you must excuse me for that. But that's what I was nibbling at intuitively. It was intuitive at the time. This business of the opposites and oneness, or not two-ness, more accurately perhaps. And of course you can have fun with that. Now this is an esteemed member of the audience in this photograph, and this is Samuel with his godfather David Coates, and it's a funny picture. I mean, there's no question. It's a nice picture. But for me, there's a lot else going on in there. And at this, I think for quite a period, the opposites thing was manifesting itself in terms of young and old. I did that a lot. And these, for me, were the pictures that seemed to succeed best. So, opposites staring at each other, but there's a kind of a unity there as well. And of course, an anonymity here, which I like. And this is Samuel and my wife Irene and myself. Someone once said, when you have a child, you die. We just have the one, but you do. Certain things die, don't they? And that was kind of to do with that, about us disappearing into him. I mean, again, it's not desperately kind of rocket science-y, but you can see what's going on. And this, just briefly, probably the only piece of work I'll ever be remembered for. There we are, that's life. Rock and roll. Here I was nibbling around the same thing. It's in a girls' school, it's all very, well, it was all kinds of things at the time, actually. Controversial, etc. But this was I was still wanting to plough this furrow of innocence and maturity, and so, I mean, this speaks, pretty loudly to that, I think. I'm not saying this person is Joe Cameron and this person is Camilla Mockery is her name. It's not really about that. But remember, I'm a real novice at this stage. I didn't know one end of a camera from another. Robin Galander's there. Without him, none of this could be done, actually. My first 6 rolls of film didn't come out, as we say in the business. Didn't have to use a camera. It wasn't my camera. I couldn't afford a proper camera. These are just examples from the book. And again, the most successful ones, and I love this photograph, there's such a tension in there, tension is not the word, but talk about opposites. These kids are 4 years old, but to me they look 40. In fact, they're older than that now. One of them's been in touch, I can't remember which one, she's now a consultant pediatrician in Baltimore, I think. And so when they're coming of age now, they're coming up to 50, they want to buy a wee print or something, and it's nice that they've stayed in touch, and some have. And of course some have had very, very difficult lives. And to be able to share that is, after all this time, is a great pleasure and privilege, really. Then this picture from the same project, which we'll move very quickly through. This really pointed the way forward for me. This notion, it's as abstract as you can get, really. It's a little black shape at a jaunty angle on a kind of white canvas with, evidence of footprints there. Some mums in particular used to find this image really quite, not alarming, but it would almost bring tears on a couple of occasions anyway. It's as though, again, it's a 4-year-old child, that she's kind of gone already, albeit at a jaunty angle, and it's all, quite a sweet little photograph. But for me, at least, there are other things going on there. It's difficult to see, the reproduction through the projector and things is always a problem, but, there are all these interesting marks in the snow and things like that. But that really is what pushed me on. Now, I'm not going through, there's tons of work not here, you'll be glad to hear. I'm just picking out kind of salient pieces. And this would be the next one. And in a way, that photograph of the small girl and the nursery pupil, it informed this when I think back. Now again, I'm keen on, I was an aspiring songwriter when I was younger, so the notion of words is important to me and the kind of poetry of them. And I try to title my projects as appositely as possible to give people a little help with it. But it's just kind of, it's straight down the middle. It's as neutral as you can get, but playing with, in this case, darkness and light. And without going into too much detail, because it's really not that interesting, but I was in a strange place when I made these. I was really quite ill. And I'd planned to go to America, actually, and I was a bit of the golden boy, I'd done this St. Margaret's project and all this publicity, and I was given money by the Arts Council, I think it was, easily, to go to America and do this kind of Robert Frank thing on medium format. Anyway, I got ill and I couldn't go. So I did my best with work, just being able to move around the environs around up my apartment. And so this is the kind of pivotal image. Darkness, light, a kind of cruciform in darkness. For me, a kind of snake-like shape in light. It's like it's wiggled its way across. I don't know, I can't say any more than that. I really can't. I just know that it's kind of been downhill ever since I took this photograph for me. I went to, I had cause to be in America at one point, and in Houston, I think it was. And there was a guy, I think it was Andy Grunberg, Robin, you'll know him. A big noise, reviewer. And I had this little bag of prints with me, and they'd had a very strange time, these images, I have to say. Anyway, he picked them up and he went, a table like this, he went, and there was 2 piles. And he said, these I love, these I don't. And it actually he picked the right one, this one was there. And I said, what do you mean? So why do you like the ones you like? He says, when you took these, you didn't have a clue what you were doing. He says, you're trying too hard with these. And this was as intuitive, believe me. And again, I don't want to keep talking to you, Robin, but Robin can testify to that because he saw the developer kind of flying around in the dark every day, So it's very difficult to talk about these in some ways. Balancing light, here's another one. They're also quite musical, I would say, and it's dedicated, I think, because it says on the title piece there, to someone called Glenn Gould, who I still listen to most days, actually. And these days I listen to nothing else. It really did kind of see me through. But so this work was, given that I had been this kind of golden boy, and I produced this, it was very strangely received, and I'm not surprised. And then I went to London, and I had a terrible time at the Photographers Gallery, and it was the worst comments that they'd received in their comments book in the gallery's history, which is probably, maybe that's the other thing I'll be remembered for. But that's the way it was, and of course I was upset. The exhibition ended, and I think it was 2 years later, this is how this appeared in Germany, in one of the biggest galleries in the land, and I was feted as some blah blah blah. I'm thinking, wait, who's right here? Because I wasn't sure myself. And I think the answer is neither and both. So that was that. I'm coming back to this image because in an ideal space, if I'm given, the mega retrospective, which will never happen, I might be tempted to put these side by side, depending on what else is in the room, quite happily actually. The pram wouldn't be far away either. Moving on quite quickly. The reason I include this, and it's a bit too large, I wasn't going to include this at all, but it's in light of the Ukrainian thing. Who can ignore it? I made a little film ages ago, a guy called Andy McGregor, who works here actually. It was an animation, very basic kind of digital thing in those days, made from Polaroids. Various little stories. And this story was called Sunflower Blues. And it's actually about a tear that appears through this. It's shot in Italy. I was out there with David and his family, and in a barn there. And this tear kind of comes almost through the door and through the sunflower. And there's some music with it and blah, blah, blah. And it occurred, there were two things really. Yet again, there's a kind of title with opposites, the bittersweet thing. Discoveries, bittersweet, these silly little discoveries, completely inane things really, in some ways. But it's the bittersweet thing. But if anyone were interested in acquiring for, I don't know, cheapest chips, £17 I think I worked out at, a little print of this. I can't remember how big the file is. I mean, the definition, not the definition, the saturation is much, much better than this. It's really deep blues and that yellow. If you go to my website, I think it's on the information leaflet there. Just drop me a line, and I'll get a print made and send it to you. You just have to trust me that I won't go to the pub and get pissed on it, to numb the horror of the whole thing. But and I would send you a print and a little. So let's say I'm trying to work it out so that you'd be giving a tenner. Cost me maybe £5 to make, and it's a token piece of tokenism. But look, so if you're interested, just drop me a line and I'll do that. Okay, so now into kind of maybe beefier projects. And by this time, I'm well versed in, I've read libraries full of books. A complete waste of time, total waste of time in this context. Does exist, cannot be expressed. But it became a bit of an addiction for me, and still is actually. So stillness and occurrence, here we go, we're off again. And these were shot over a 5-year period. This is in film, actually, it's pre-digital. And they look very digital now, but they're not. And this was done at Portobello. And yeah, it was technically quite a challenge to do this. And these were very successful for me until the negatives got destroyed, which was a bit of a setback. Not all the negatives. So I was with a gallery called Richard Ingleby, and things were going very well, thank you, financially, and then the whole thing collapsed. They've been repaired. The good thing now is that I can give these prints to people as presents and name my own price and things, because when you're tied into a big gallery, they said, and particularly Ingleby, which is a fantastic gallery, but it's all about provenance, etc., etc. So this whole thing fell apart for me. It was quite a lesson in something or other. There were 15 of these, and they were acquired by Pink Floyd and I think Elton John and other people like that you might expect, I suppose. They're disgustingly beautiful, but some people don't like this kind of beauty. I'm absolutely the first to admit that. They see it as a veil to a particular kind of engagement. My thing is beauty, I'm afraid. Back to Joni Mitchell, It's just, choose your poison. It's not for everybody. Photographs, especially groups of similar photographs, tend to demonstrate that time and space are not laws of physics, but human metaphors invented to keep everything from happening all at once in the same place. So, just in case you think I'm the only photographer in the world who's juggling around with these mad ideas about what I've said, time and space, etc., etc. There's an approach in photography called typology. I'm not an expert in it. I've had to kind of teach it occasionally, but one busks these things as ever. And it's from a kind of way of scientific documentation. So you're comparing similar things in identical ways. The lighting's the same, the distance from the camera and it's so that you can compare and contrast. So there is this sense of this one taste thing again, changing, but it's not. It's changing but not, changing but not. And that alludes to certain kind of philosophical things that you may or may not be interested in. It so happens that music does it really well, in a way that you don't have to understand it, but that's, for me, that's what Philip Glass would be doing, or Steve Reich or someone like that. That's the button they're trying to push. It's just a much more visceral thing in music, isn't it? And you just go with it. But in visual art as well, particularly in photography, there is this thing called typology. This isn't always the reason for doing it, but it's one of them. And so we come to the images that are upstairs in the lovely corner studio space there. And this is a cedar tree, photographed from morning till night, from the same position actually. There was traffic driving around me in Japan, completely mad, and the boiling heat. And I took these things, and there's 8 of them upstairs. Now, the kind of tricky bit is, the actual image is the central shot on a Hasselblad, blah, blah, blah. The image on the right is taken from the left-hand side of the central shot. The image on the left is taken from the right-hand side of the central shot. So there's this kind of weird, it's like a kind of echo, or best put by, the linear progression. The sense of time unfolding is made to turn back on itself so that present, past, and future become one never-changing thing. Never, ever, blah, blah, blah. That's from Tom Normand. And that is the intention. It's this kind of oneness within this context. And then we're coming to... Funnily enough, I was in a bar one night. I've just remembered this just now, actually. It was in Japan, and I had a portfolio case. And a woman came up to me and said, "What's in there?" So it's just photographs, and I somehow had some of these prints with me. And she demanded to see what they were, in a friendly way. She bought me a drink and all this. And I opened them up, and she just put her hands on her face. It was Hiroshima Day, which they have in Japan. And when she saw these, and to be absolutely honest, as I was shooting them, I had this sense of the most incredible energy from morning till night, and just this explosion of energy. And it is like a kind of post-nuclear thing, actually, like this. I didn't really know what to say to her. They were made at this, one actually, this is Richard Ingleby, who I was with at the time. He took this to, I think it was Hong Kong. So, very different things. But the good thing about photography is that you can play around with scale. And I'm happy with the size of those images upstairs as well, actually. But these were so it's like a forest if you print them at this side. You want to walk into it, really. But who can afford that? Richard Ingleby can. But we didn't go quite that far. I think we just made the one. And it was nice to have that done. So here's another quote by a great writer, I think, actually. And don't get me wrong, I'm not an art theory boffin at all. I had enough of trying to ram certain things down students' throats. At a particular time, this art theory took over in art, not just particularly in photography as well. And I didn't feel comfortable with it. Because I didn't understand it. A lot of it's so impenetrable. It's because some of it's pure philosophy, and you can't expect an artist to understand Michel Foucault and all that stuff. They don't. You kind of pretend they need to, but you'll know that it's nonsense. Graham's a philosopher up there. But certain texts, I think, do illuminate things, Again, it's this does exist, cannot be expressed. But some people come close. So the bland aesthetic is maybe not what I'm about to show you and what this guy's thinking of, but I've hijacked it a bit. I think he means something a bit more quotidian or everyday. But it is this something of predictability. Here we go again. Same again. Same again. Same again. Same again. So with these photographs I'm going to show you, there's at least a hint that if the camera could have been wound up and just a little program set, you just set it off on the tripod and say, "Come back when you're finished. I'm not there." That's the smoke and mirrors. Of course I'm there. I set it all up. But this is what is going on here. So in a sense, there's no author. And of course you're into postmodernism and all that stuff, which I don't want to talk about particularly. That's the rationale behind it. So these are just documentary pictures of the temples where I took these photographs. Beautiful. My heart just breaks looking at them now, actually. There's 88 of these on a hillside. They have 88 sister temples on an island called Shikoku. And it takes 3 months, if you're fit, to walk around. 3 months. These you can get around in 3 hours. And they're so sweet. It's just indescribably sweet. But they all have their counterparts. So it's 88 places. Is what it's the Japanese. It translates into that. Based on the fact that, the notion that we have 88 desires that need satisfying or eradicating, and it's a little tour of these things to achieve a kind of enlightenment and pray for ill people. So I'm not going to show you them all. But this is typology. Here we go again. Here we go again. Here we go again. And they have to be in sequence, of course, from 1 to 88. The light has to be identical. The distance of the camera, from the camera to the bell, has to be identical. The distance from the bell to the wall has to be identical. And then you get this Philip Glass kind of thing. So it's like a visual mantra, alluding to a kind of, again, it's this kind of oneness. So you have this anchor point in the foreground, right in the middle, and this dreamy kind of out-of-focus stuff in the background. If it's a typology of anything, this is a crazy thing to say, but it's a typology of space. Different kinds of space, different events around this anchor point. I don't know if I said that before. These took 3 years to do, on and off. And to be honest, I felt not completely, but quite mad when I was doing them. This just is crazy. It took me a long time to set it up, the concept. But even as I was doing them, working, you have no idea how difficult it was. But the heat was unbearable. I had this huge kind of Van Gogh hat, and the locals, of course, thought I was bonkers. But in the third year, they would come out and feed me like a pilgrim, which I was very moved by. Cold coffee, cake. Couldn't say anything. I can't speak Japanese, but they kind of treated me as a kind of Van Gogh character, I think. The relief came when, again, I'm not being immodest here. Goodness me, I wish this had carried on in my life. But Ingleby sold all of these, one set, and that was a relief to me. I thought, well, the person who's bought these are as mad as me, or they can see what's going on. And so there were 88 framed photographs. I've never seen them, and never will. Unfortunately, it was a bank. And they're behind closed doors somewhere in New York somewhere. So I'm not showing them all, I'm just kind of whizzing through. But you get the idea. Number 68, I remember it well, number 60. I remember them all. Every single one of these I remember, because I would sit and have a fag I smoked in those days, and a little drink of water. And now, in the corridor, the little corridor space upstairs, there's just 3 images from this piece. And my plan was that there's 78 of these or something. It's all very obsessive. Was to go back, pump it up to 88, and in this kind of dream gallery scenario, have a room full of the bells, big white room full of the couples adjacent. And you just walk around the lot, because it's the same thing again. That's how it looks, a document of the river, which flows through Kyoto, and you see these couples sitting. Again, it took a long time to work out how to, because usually it's just too hot to be out, so it had to be, I think, April or September, and the light and all that stuff as well, So you've got these central characters and all the flow, this stuff going on beyond them. But again, more than a hint at a kind of oneness. Yeah, it doesn't really need saying, does it? All ages, heterosexual. In Japan, at least in these days, this is it's a wee while ago now, actually. The business, the notion of the gender thing. In fact, I inquired recently how old this tradition was, because I'm told it's an old tradition. And a Japanese guy told me, he says, it'll be just after the Second World War. because people would never dream of appearing like that in public prior to then. So I thought it had maybe gone back for centuries, but it doesn't. And photography, as ever, there are always issues, not always, but often. And there's an issue of these people not knowing they're being photographed, and photography's moved on a lot. I mean, even since that St. Margaret's work, which there are some issues in there, some problems there, it was of its time. I think some of it I still really like, some of it not so much. And the same with this, but I just have to throw up my hands and say, well, the ends justify the means, which is maybe a dangerous thing to say. But for the most part, these people aren't recognizable. There's such a beautifully, what can you say about the Japanese without being patronizing? That they're just so well turned out. As my mum would have said. I mean, they're just so well, and so tidy, the shoes. And there's a lot about Japanese culture in here, actually, as well, in that more contemporary sense. They do this to people on a bicycle thing, particularly male and female. It's so sweet. Bicycles everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. And the light, it's just... And look at the way she's sitting on a wee bag. And they're held together by the same scarf. And we did a very primitive dissolve. I'm going to come on to such things in a minute, actually. On the riverside itself. So this is at night by the river, in a gallery by the river, and it's a very kind of low-quality projection. But it was okay. I've done a much better version of it now. This is moving into... Again, I'll move on quickly. I've got too much work here, sorry. We have to believe in free will. We have no choice. I'm going to show you some little films, just a couple of minutes, shortly. Illusion of agency. So this fits in it's the notion of free will. And a lot of, like it or not, a lot of science does point to the fact that free will's, we need it. We need to survive. And we need good and bad and things, and in some ways, but technically speaking, it's just highly unlikely that it exists. Again, 2,000 years ago, these folk were bang, because this is from a text, that expression. But now, it seems unlikely that anything has that kind of independent, unless you might believe in a soul or whatever. It's another discussion, isn't it, really? But these are little figurines of about the size of your thumbnail, and they're for scaling architectural models. So normally you would rip them off and paint them. But what I've done is I've just stuck them on a wall in Menorca, actually, on a piece of paper with some blue tack, and just photographed them like this. They're my wee pals. I got to know them all very well. And it's great. The camera is just a rubbish camera. It's a little pocket thing. It's the size of a fact packet. So it's slightly out of focus and recording the light in a... When I came back from Menorca, I actually shot these again with a big bog-off Nikon DSLR. Every studio light you can imagine in the studio. They were horrendous. Pin-sharp rubbish. So I stuck with these. And I've always liked this one. I'm going to try and show you a couple of minutes of a little film I've made of them, which I really am fond of. So the illusion of agency, the notion of it's a Heath Robinson version of The Matrix. You're plugged in, you don't know it, you're getting on with your life, you think it's you, Leonard Cohen. It was never me, it was always you. Says Leonard. Pop music says these things the best of all, actually. It was never me, it was always you. So that's what this is alluding to, whether you kind of connect with that or not. And the notion of people dropping off on either side and another one growing, that would be what this is about. But basically, this one energy just unfolding Forgive them, they know not what they do. Very quickly, I was trying to get a book off the ground. COVID put the mockers on it. Need to raise some money. But it's about work along the promenade at Portobello. This was an installation shots of a projection at Portobello. So I walked there most days, and I came up with this. It's a book, really. But this was an installation on the prom itself, in the midst of COVID. But we had a few people there. We're allowed some people to come. But you can see us playing with these pairings, these dualities again. And there's little kind of narratives going on between them. And the background, difficult to see, but that is a moving image. That's film of the sea moving. So these things slowly emerge out of the sea and slowly return to it, and then they relate to each other. It's very difficult to see from this, but that's the idea. Whether the book will ever happen, I don't know, we'll see. And this is ongoing. This is, because I'm photographing all the time, if you go up in my little kind of studio space, on the wall there's hundreds, it might be thousands, of little square pictures. I get them done at Boots. And, just put a few together, two together, think again, try another two. We're back in the pram again. It's that, how do these two things relate? And this was work that Ali Smith, the novelist, took a great shine to. It's called Dreaming Difference, as you can see. Again, Dreaming Difference, same old, same old. And Ali and I worked on a book together, but unfortunately it never saw the light of day, which is a shame. So she wrote texts for all these, some of them very, very good, of course, as you would imagine, but it didn't quite happen. I think she was drawn to this work because in her work, as far as I know, what I know about it, she's very keen on pulling together disparate things and making them connect. So here you've got my son, slightly injured foot there, walking around the stars and the planets, and a ladder just going off into nowhere. What does it mean? Not a clue. And then the notion here is that the clouds, like the people, will just dissolve and move and whatever. It's quite an obvious one. There's a sense of the koan around these. I don't know if you're familiar with the notion of the Zen koan. You can't pin it down, but it means something, a parched table, and then a fan, and then a religious piece of religious iconography. This is fairly straightforward. So this is Samuel in the days when he would allow me to have a bath with him, and then just before he left for university, in the same bath. And I made a little film around this as well for him when he left. Washing line with pegs, rainbow with bird flying out the top. They're just like little poems, little one-line poems. No more, really. So it's an allusion to Calvary on the left of obviously, the three, well, maybe not, the three computers. Sometimes it's just form. You've got the chairs echoed with these kind of wish flower things, and then the brown cat and the brown. But you can imagine, surely, me doing this. Oh, there's that. Oh, that reminds me of that. It's like a Rubik's Cube. So it's slightly mad. There's wee Samuel. Look at him. He was mad on guns, like a lot of boys are. That to me, and then that dummy tit, this kid's dummy had been washed up. It was like he'd killed his youth, whatever. So there's loads of these. This is the last one in the book that I did with Ali. And this is the midday sky and the midnight sky, taken from the same point. But so, again, there's no difference kind of thing, really, apart from the colour. Very finally, this is a photograph I took. It's not that long ago, actually, maybe a few years, but it seemed to sum up a lot of what I'm been trying to say here, albeit not that fluently. So it's an equal sign floating in a void. Almost an equal sign, not quite. If the matches, a little pun there, but the match heads are there. And I like this photograph a lot. I've never shown it and never will. But it does kind of bring us back here. Somehow 40 years earlier or whatever that was. That's the end of that. I'm just going to quickly show some. I'm doing not badly for time, actually. 5 minutes more. If you're interested, I'm pretty sure. Sam, is the email address there?
Yes.
I'll make these, if you like, say it'll be £17, including postage and packing. And they'll be numbered and signed. They're very limited edition, unless, I might put it on social media at some point, but no prints were ever made of that work. And they're small. But if you want to get in touch with me, then please do. So let me just quickly, hopefully, he said, show you this. I'm just going to show you literally a couple of minutes of each. There's 3 little films. In the light of what I've tried to express, it's probably not much of a surprise that the business of images dissolving into each other, I'm very keen on. I'm very keen on. And it's not pushing back the frontiers of Western art, but into full screen. But it seems to suit the agenda that I've just. But I love still images. I absolutely love. And what I've tried to do here is it is actually combine both. If these were ever to be shown, which is unlikely, I like the idea of the still images complementing what's in the film, and I'm drawn to small prints in that respect these days. Now Lee Patterson is here somewhere. Where's Lee? You're still here. Hi, Lee. And Lee did the sound. Well, I don't know how do we describe it? Sound, music for these, and what can I say? So, just briefly, a rather strange title. It's a trilogy. It's 3 pieces, quite kind of different. Lived. And it is the notion. It's about, I suppose, being lived rather than living. That's part of it. It's difficult to explain, but so the first one. See, hopefully the sound's working. I'll just give you a minute or so. You'll get the idea quite quickly. Oops. Together. And then I put together all, what was it, 70, however many I said, 78 of these. So you've got the young people becoming old, the males becoming female, etc. In a kind of obvious way, really. But retaining somehow, you know, the integrity of the still image. So that's the balancing act I was trying to achieve. I mean, I may not have achieved it. I mean, nobody's seen these before, by the way. And may never. But it was a delight to work with Lee, who did all the actual technical stuff of putting the images into, you know, in the sequencing and all, it dissolves and things. But the music was a lovely thing such a lovely surprise. And then finally, because we're going to run out of time here, if there was ever divine light, I think this is it for me. It's extraordinary light. And they're so beautifully modelled, these things, for, you know, 2 centimetres high. I got a real shock when I blew them up as photographs. I had no idea they looked like that. And that is what I did on my holidays. Thank you very much. If you want to ask any questions, I'm here, but if not, it doesn't matter. See, the work's upstairs if you haven't seen it. And the other work, of course. It's a glorious place this to show work. It's just so much, I don't know. This sounds patronising, but it's got incredible potential, which it's always had, of course, but and I'm sure Sam will move that forward. It's just amazing.
Can I make a point?
Please.
I was interested in what you were saying about the scale of the work.
Yes.
You know, and I remember when you went down to London with your ecstasy.
Yes, I remember that.
It was what, mid-80s, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
There was a time when everybody was making huge, what called silicone aluminium mounted prints that were about 6 feet high.
That's right.
You were appearing to these people.
No wonder they laughed me out of town.
And also, I think, you know, the pictures that Ingleby sold of your triptychs, your cedar triptychs, are upstairs.
Yeah.
I mean, the prints upstairs in these frames, for me, they're just the perfect scale.
Yeah.
These enormous
Yeah.
glazed prints just didn't.
No. No, thank you. I think you're right. And it's a funny thing, that skill thing. The pictures as shown upstairs have never been shown. They were shown in the Daiwa Foundation, but they've never been shown in Scotland because Ingleby and I parted ways, and all that work just lay in my attic, really. I think you're right. I think what you've reminded me of is something about when those pictures were made. It was at a time when Martin Parr was coming through, all these full colour, highly socially engaged work, and people looked at that and thought, we were just not having this, I can understand that, but for me there's more ways of skinning a cat than one.
I remember somebody said truly transcendental day, and I don't think he meant it in a good way.
No, they don't, no. Of course not. But there are many, look, for me this is the equivalent, maybe is as effective as homeopathy. If one or two people get into this and hang out on their walls, then that's it. I'm not going to stop the war in Ukraine, that's for sure. And art's duty is, of course, to change the world. There's no doubt about that. But there are many, many ways of doing it. And it can be the equivalent of very obscure poetry. And if it's just a few people, it's just a few people. But that's what the work fell victim to in London. And yet in Germany, it was massively received. I was absolutely taken aback by that. So I'm used to being dismissed as whatever. It's just what I do. Robin, we're old enough now not to... The cat's out the back, We're going to pretend we're something that we're not.
I'm just here to support the old folk. I hope you do the same for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm happy to say something else, but it's nearly 3 o'clock, which I think we've done quite well to get through all that, like an animation in parts.
Where did the wee figures come from again?
The college shop.
College shop, so they're sort of from what, yeah. It kind of reminds me of figures from Pompeii or something like that, frozen in time, that clock, just an impression.
They came from it's funny how work comes about. Graham used to work in the college, most notably actually. But you see things, even this morning I was having a bath and feeling slightly nervous about this and all that stuff, And the light was falling on the plant in a particular way. I noticed it 2 days ago and I took a picture for Rennie. It's an orchid that she's trying to grow. And you suddenly started to, and I thought, that's interesting. That light, and then move the curtain. So I took this picture, she loves it. It does look lovely. And I'm looking today and I'm thinking, wow, it's different again. So that's going to be a body of work for me, that daft little plant in the bathroom. And it was like, I would go into the college shop, and they were in big trays, these things, for the architects to... And I thought, someday I have to photograph that. I don't know why, but... And I was going off to Menorca on my holiday, and I paid for them, by the way. Just grabbed a bunch, and at random, and threw them in my suitcase. But for months they'd been bugging me. Like the picture of the cross and the shadows in those photographs. I would kind of walk past it on my way around to Robin's Dark and I think, man, what's going on there? That is strange. And eventually, it must have taken weeks. I was a wee bit knackered at the time, but I set up the camera, and I'm just going to finish here because this is quite amusing. This business of the transcendental, all that shit, So I've got the slowest film possible, Robin, because I couldn't afford a big camera, so I could make big prints, which I didn't. So I'm under this, and this guy taps me on the shoulder, and here's me about to take the greatest picture that I've ever done. He says, "You a photographer then?" I said, "Yeah, and the light's moving, and that exact line is just about to shift." I said, "Yeah." He says, "I own a carpet warehouse." He says, "Could you photograph the carpet tiles for me?" So I needed the money, So I made a note of this and I said, "Fuck off," And eventually, so when I look at it, I also think of carpet tiles, strangely enough. It doesn't get less transcendental than that. Anyway, listen, thanks for coming. I've been a great pleasure to see you, and enjoy yourselves. Thank you.